Hi all. In today's video, I will discuss two important checkmate patterns involving the use of the bishop pair. I'll start with the black-burn mate and then move on to the Bowden mate. This is the skeletal structure of what the black-burn mate looks like. As you can see, black's king is trapped in the corner and white's bishop pair delivers the mate. Let's see how this position can be reached when there are pawns around the castle king. Here the black king is again trapped in the corner and white's bishops are aimed at the black king. So it's just a matter of simplification. White can play the queen sack, queen captures f6, and black is forced to recapture, otherwise queen captures g7 would just be checkmate. So after the pawn recaptures, we have the black-burn mate with bishop captures f6, checkmate. Now this is another way to get to the mate. This is in fact from the famous game played between Blackburn and Swartz, and it was up to this position that the mate got its name. So here white starts with a queen sack again, with the idea that after the queen is captured, the bishop gets an open diagonal, so that white can finish the game with bishop h7. And this is checkmate. Note that the knight on g5 plays an important role of supporting the bishop. Sometimes it's also possible to cut off all the flight squares for the enemy king, and then gradually position a piece to finish the game. This is a good example of that strategy. Here white can start with bishop e6. Now what this does is, it cuts off all the flight squares for the king. So all that needs to be done is play bishop d4, and it's game over. But before that, if black decides to play knight b5, to prevent the bishop from going to d4, then white can just switch diagonals with bishop h2. Now again white threatens mate with bishop e5, and this time white's knight can't really do anything. So regardless of what black plays, bishop e5 is mate. Have a look at this position. It's white to play. All the ingredients for the black-burn mate are already there. So white starts with bishop captures g6. After the natural recapture, queen e6, and it's checkmate. The queen can always do the job of a bishop. Here it's white's play and mate in 2. You can pause the video and see if you can find the mate. White starts with rook captures g6, a devastating move. And black has only two options, either the h7 pawn or the f7 pawn has to recapture, since the king can't move. Either way it's mate. If h7 captures the rook, then we have queen h8, which is mate. And if f7 captures the rook, then we have knight to e7, checkmate. It's a double check, so the queen can't take the knight, and the rook can't interpose to block the line of the bishop, so it's checkmate. This time it's black to play. This is a checkmate in 4 problem. You can pause the video, take your time, and see if you can find the mate. I'll go straight into the solution now. Black must start with rook captures g2, and since the rook is protected, it cannot be captured by the king, so king h1 is the only option. But now what? Here is the tricky move, rook h2. The point of this move is that if white captures the rook, he falls into the mate net, and if he doesn't and just plays king g1, then we have Anderson's mate with rook h1. So let's suppose king captures the rook. Now as soon as the black knight moves, there'll be a discovered attack from the bishop. So knight to g4 inflicts the double check, and king g1 is again forced. And now we have our black-burn mate with bishop to h2, checkmate. Now let's go back and see what would happen if at this point white declines the rook sacrifice and goes back to g1. Well then, we have rook h1, checkmate. This is another famous position, which is again from one of Blackburn's games. It's black to play here. This time there's no straight road to checkmate, but there's an opportunity to gain lots of material. Black plays knight to g4, which threatens queen h2, which would be mate, so white has to play h3. And now, black doesn't move the knight but instead decides to keep up with the pressure and play bishop captures f2, check. This drives the king into the corner, and it is now that black has a very interesting resource to his disposal. Can you find it? Well, black plays bishop to f5. White doesn't have time now to save his queen, since if he does, he'll get mated. Let's just suppose queen captures rook. Then black has queen captures h3, forcing open the long diagonal, and black finishes the game in style with bishop captures e4, checkmate. So the point is that in this position, white doesn't have time to save his queen, and according to Ripka, the best move would be d3, after which the rook takes the queen. Coming to the next idea I'd like to discuss in this video, it's another mating net making use of the bishop pair. It's called the Bowden mate. It looks very similar to the Blackburn mate, so I thought I'd just include it here. Usually you'd find this pattern appearing more often when the king is castled queenside, but sometimes it's even possible kingside, as you see in this position. As I said, it is more common to deliver the Bowden mate in this fashion, where the king has castled queenside and the rook is still on the d-file. Let's go through a few more examples to see how to get to this kind of mate. Here, the black king looks quite safe in its castle position, but white has a forced mate in 2. The pawns are not well supported, not supported at all in fact, so white can break the black pawn structure with a queen sacrifice. Queen captures c6, check. This forces a recapture, after which we have bishop a6, checkmate. Now that you've got an idea of what exactly to look for, we'll get into some more complicated positions. You can always pause the video whenever you need a few seconds to think through the variations. Anyway, here it's white's move. I'd suggest that you think of ways to open the diagonal to the king. The simplest and most effective happens to be rook to c6, check. And black has two options. One is knight captures rook, and the other is b7 captures rook. Either way, the result is the same. Let's go through both variations. If knight captures rook, white replies with queen captures knight, after which b7 captures the queen, and then bishop a6, and it's checkmate. Going back, if at this point b7 captures instead of the knight, well then we have the same continuation. The queen can still capture on c6, and after the knight recaptures, then we have bishop a6, checkmate. Here's another example of delivering the Bowden mate by first breaking the pawn wall. It's black to play, and this time I think it's a bit too obvious, so I think I should just play down the moves. Rook captures f3 would probably be the first thing that comes to mind. So white really doesn't have many options. If the bishop takes the rook, then black can just sack his other rook to open the diagonal, and then bishop h3 delivers the Bowden mate. This is quite an interesting position. It's white to play and mate in 4. You can pause the video if you need to and try to find the continuation for white. It should appear quite simple now, since you've seen so many positions and how to maneuver your pieces to reach the required position. Anyway, I'll get into the solution. White starts with rook h3, check, and after king g8 we have bishop e6, check. And again, black has only one move, which is king f7. This is followed by queen captures f6, check. And after the queen is off the board, it's the usual bishop check to finish things off. Okay, that was the last position for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.